One of the great things about Black Clover is the mystery that dwells within the world and its lore. Creator Yuki Tabata does an amazing job at world building and foreshadowing, and it leads to some of the most rewarding reveals in any fictional stories that I have ever consumed. This leads me to a theory that Asta may not be who he seems, but that he may not just be a peasant with no magic, that he may be much, much more. Now before I do get into this theory video, I'll give you one simple warning. This video will contain manga spoilers, so beware. Also, if you want to hire me as a personal trainer, the link to my website will be linked down below. And also, thank you guys so much for 40,000 subscribers. Now, we begin the quest to 50,000, so please subscribe if you haven't yet, and also leave a like and turn on notifications if you do end up enjoying the video. One of the things that Tabata loves to do with his writing is by answering burning questions that the fandom has, and then while revealing that information, it only fills us with even more questions hoping to be answered. For example, in the recent training arc in which Asta fought the devil that dwelled in his 5-leaf clover grimoire, we got many questions answered. We got the answer of who was Asta's mom, that was Licita. We got who dropped off Asta at the church, which was Licita. We got why he was dropped off the church, and that was because Licita's body has a weird power that causes her to steal both the life force and mana from the beings around her. So she didn't want to kill Asta. This in turn also implied the answer to the question, why did Asta have no magic? And that would be that it was stolen from him by his mother due to her unnatural powers. While it was great to get answers to these questions, it only leaves me with a burning question. That is, how did Asta even survive inside of Licita's womb? The reason this has become a question is because of how potent her magic and life-stealing ability is. For example, we know that Licita lives off in her own little cabin away from society so she doesn't harm anybody else. We see a magic snake try to attack her, but it stops and dies just several feet away from her. But the most impressive thing of all was how it worked against Lucifero, one of, if not the strongest devil in Black Clover. When Lucifero attempted to take over Lib's body, a hug from a dying Licita had completely expelled him from Lib, and then she transferred Lib quickly into the 5-leaf clover grimoire that she had discovered. So if Licita is forced to live away from society, can kill a magical snake just by being in its presence, and can expel the strongest devil in the universe just from a hug, then how would Asta survive 9 long months in her womb? Think about it, he'd be even closer to her than Lucifero was. Now, this would have to mean that Asta was intended to be an incredibly powerful force since he survived a 9-month-long process, whereas Lucifero got BTFO'd by a hug. This also calls into another question. If Lucifero couldn't withstand a hug from Asta's mother, what man could survive a bout of sexual intercourse with her to conceive this fated child? While it seems silly to beg the question, but really, if Lucifero couldn't take a hug, any man, even of royal or even elven blood, they would be on a one-way ticket if they entered Licita's bed. They wouldn't be leaving that bed, they'd be gone, they'd be dead. This does imply several things. Whoever Asta's father is, he must be incredibly powerful, for a multitude of reasons. For him to even last a full round with Licita, and then for him to pass on his powerful genes to his son, Asta, so that he himself could survive the womb. Now I've seen many people claim that Asta is a dwarf hybrid rather, meaning that his father would be a dwarf. With dwarves being more powerful on average than humans, their mana rivaling the elves, it would almost seem logical that this is possible. This is mainly backed up by Asta's first interaction with Lib inside the grimoire during the Witch's Forest arc. In this interaction, Lib refers to Asta as a dwarf, and Asta even refers to himself one as well. There is no way a dwarf like you could win that. Then Asta says, don't underestimate dwarves. Now the issue is that due to the differences in languages between English and Japanese, we can actually debunk this statement from Lib. As in the Japanese kanji, they use different symbols for dwarf, as in the race of people from Norse mythology or other fantasy series, and dwarf, the term that means a person who is unusually or abnormally small stature because of a congenital condition or a person affected by dwarfism. The kanji used in this scene is the meaning for the latter definition, not the former, which signifies that of the mythological or fantasy race of magical beings. Now, in the English language, the translation would make it possible for Lei to be saying the fantasy race, or people that are just short. But because the Japanese kanji doesn't use the symbol for dwarf from mythology, it is much less likely that Asta is the child of a dwarf, or a dwarf himself. It also just makes more sense with the dialogue that Asta is referred to as a dwarf for his height and no other reason, as it would make no sense for Lib to talk about Asta being a dwarf, and if he was implying that being a dwarf would be too weak to defeat Ladros, when in reality we know that dwarves are a very powerful race, they're up there with the elves. Also, if the dwarves are just equal or even just marginally stronger than elves, then a dwarf wouldn't really make sense that they could still survive or helping conceive the child that would be Asta. Because if you think about it, Lucifero should be massively stronger than Licht, and yet Lucifero got BTFO'd by a hug. Is a dwarf really going to survive this with Licita? Or even survive long enough to then actually reach completion and then pass on his genes that makes Asta strong enough to survive in the womb? Now this leads me to my next theory, that Asta is a human Jotunn hybrid. Jotun being one of the races in Norse mythology and often featured in many fantasy series as giants. I don't know for sure how they would be portrayed in the Black Clover world, but if I were to guess, they would be portrayed more so as gods rather than a race. For example, many people get confused with the Norse mythos. Elves, dwarves, and humans are all mortal races. Of course, on average, humans were the weakest, though many great heroes would come to surpass the dwarves and elves through magic items or cunning. Some even gifted by fate with immense physical strength, but the Jotun are not actually a race in the same sense. The Jotun are actually a tribe of gods that represent chaos and darkness. They were the first gods. The Aesir would come later, and the Vanir after that. The Jotun are also not necessarily giants. Many are of mortal size, many are of giant size, and many are shapeshifters. For example, Loki is often portrayed to be the size of a man. Ymir, the first Jotun, was killed by his 3 grandsons, Odin, Vili, and Ve, and with his remains they created the multiple universes called realms. So, multiple universal-sized being in Ymir. So yeah, giants. And then, many of the stars in the sky are also said to be the toes of Jotun that were slain by the mighty Thor, then tossed into the sky. And then you have Jormungandr, the world serpent. He has many varying sizes. He can encompass all of the realms with his body, or completely condense his body to the size of a cat. At one point, he tricked Thor, as the cat was so heavy he could barely lift it up, because all of his weight was condensed into the body the size of a cat. This is why many scholars have separated the term giants from the Jotun, as it really isn't an accurate descriptor. The Jotun are more accurately defined to be the first tribe of gods in Norse mythology that are incredibly powerful and for the most part represent chaos, darkness, decay, and entropy. A more accurate translation of the Jotun is actually meaning devourer or consumer, which can be something like consuming or eating something or completely destroying something. The term for devouring would be a fit for Asta, as his anti-magic powers completely devour mana, its black hue displaying the dark attributes of the power of a Jotun. In fact, it would seem that Licita's own body emits a power that is reminiscent of the nature of a Jotun as well, which could mean that if Asta's father was a Jotun, the effect of her body wouldn't affect him at all, or at the very least, he would have resistance to the ability, because he himself is a devourer. So, if Asta's father is a Jotun, Licita's body might not really have much of an effect on him. With Asta gaining Jotun genetics, he would have the ability to survive the long 9 months process, though he would escape with his life. His mana would be left behind, consumed by the unnatural powers of his mother's body. So, it just would almost somewhat make sense here, because elves, dwarves, they shouldn't be strong enough to survive Licita, and then for Asta to survive 9 months, him being a dwarven or elven hybrid just doesn't really make sense for him to survive 9 months. That's a long process. But if the Aesir and the Jotun are of equal power and they're gods which would be above elves, dwarves, and then they'd also probably be above the devils as well, then if the gods are that much above devils, then maybe that would show how Asta could survive in the womb for 9 months. Now, you might question the validity of this proposal, and I would too. Remember, this is just a fan theory. I'm not claiming this to be a fact or even a likelihood, but I know one of the claims that people will bring up is that if he was a Jotun, then the Witch Queen would have been able to deduce that when she analyzed his blood. While this might seem damning on the surface, this actually can be quite easily explained away just by looking at the other hybrid we know in the series, that being Charmy. When Charmy had entered the hybrid state of her dwarven form, it revealed a second magic type, a different type of mana that we'll recognize as dwarven mana, an alternate variation of her grimoire. But not only this, her body and physical appearance changed drastically, growing taller, much more muscular, her face changed. Can the Witch Queen really tell that Asta isn't a Jotun when a hybrid like Charmy had her physical body change and transform? Also, her claim can be brought into criticism anyways, as her analysis for the reason of Asta lacking magic is likely wrong, as it is implied that he doesn't have magic because he was in the womb of Licita for 9 months, and Licita steals magic power from the people. Just by the way, Tabata wrote that scene of the reveal of her body, and showing her leaving Asta the church just pages later. That means Tabata is essentially implying that that is why Licita dropped Asta from the church, and that is implying that is why Asta doesn't have magic, though the Witch Queen simply states that it was a mutation, which goes against the narrative that Tabata is currently instilling into this arc of the manga. Because of the transformation that entails from a hybrid, and the failure to properly analyze the reason for Asta lacking magic, it might be a bit of an overestimation of the Witch Queen's ability, and should take her statement with a grain of salt. While there has been no proper introduction of the Jotun within Black Clover, their name has been mentioned in one of Raya's spells in the anime, but they don't really need to have been introduced for them to be a thing. If 4 of the Norse races in Norse mythology have been mentioned, the elves, dark elves, and dwarves, the idea of a god of fate being mentioned, which hints at the Norns in Norse mythology are witches that use threads to manipulate and dictate fate. Vanessa is a witch that uses threads to manipulate and dictate fate. That is a huge tie there. William's World Tree magic, it is Yggdrasil, and even mentioned by Tabata that he used the Norse sagas to bring that into his series, including using the name of a Norse hero in one of William's spells. Needless to mention that the actual gods have not really been introduced yet, they are clearly lurking in the background, as there have been mentions of them. While it seems the Clovers worship a cross-based god, it doesn't necessarily debunk anything. It could almost be like how the Greek pantheon was worshipped. Many knew that other gods existed, though they often devoted their time of worship to a single one. What if the cross-like god of Clover is just one of the gods in Black Clover, one of the Aesir, and that is the one they worship? For example, Baldur would be considered a very Christ-like figure within the Norse mythos. He would be a mythic parallel to Jesus Christ. He died and came back to life. He's the son of the Allfather. He's a being of light. Like how Christ is the son of God, Jesus Christ died and came back to life. What if the Clover Kingdom is really just worshipping Baldur? There's even a hint that Charmy's wolf is actually Fenrir. Fenrir is the son of Loki in Norse mythology, as Loki had an intercourse with a wolf and birthed the Great Devourer. Fenrir is known as a devourer because he kills and eats the Allfather Odin, and he swallows the multiverse. He was also binded with the aid of the dwarves. Charmy being a dwarven hybrid, her pairing food magic with the wolf, who was even stated by Lyra, a devourer of magic, provides a huge tie between Black Clover and Norse mythology. Like I just said, the dwarves were tasked with the aid of binding Fenrir. Charmy is a dwarf, she has a wolf that is a devourer and incredibly powerful. Maybe this wolf is Fenrir. Asta also has immense physical strength, while it is deduced to it being because of training. Even when he was just starting training as a 5-year-old, he could run through Yuno's tornadoes, and as a baby, he was strong enough to kick and damage the father at the church. Asta, as a magicless baby, shouldn't be able to damage an adult that has mana, unless if Asta was already born with super strength. Jotun are known to be physical specimens as well, as many had great bouts with Thor, who was the god with the most physical strength. That is until his own son, Magni, would surpass him. What if one of the reasons for Asta's growth for physical strength is because he is a half Jotun? Now, people would say, well, this would take away that Asta is strong because of his hard work, but I don't really see it that way. If he is just a half Jotun and he lost a bunch of his he lost all his mana, probably lost a lot of his life energy, but was still born with super strength, he still used a lot of hard work to get to the point where he is now. It doesn't really take it away. It might just take a little bit away because he might have Jotun blood and that helps his physical strength, that helps him get stronger faster, but we still have to remember he got stronger because of how much he worked. This is kind of the same thing with Yuno. Yuno was revealed to be a royal and he still worked incredibly hard. It didn't really necessarily take away from all of his hard work. It just kind of added context to why he was so powerful. This would also add context if Asta is a half Jotun. In a sense, this could make Asta becoming the Wizard King the ultimate achievement, as he'd essentially break down all barriers. Asta is a magicless peasant from the Forsaken Realm. He's of half Jotun race, the race of the evil gods, that attempt to bring their realms back into primordial chaos. He uses an elven grimoire that has been corrupted into a fifth leaf. He likely uses dwarven swords, as it has been so subtly implied, and he uses anti-magic borrowed from the contract with his devil. Not being notably attractive, he has bulging muscles in a society where most men are frail due to the nittiness of magic and mana. If Asta has all of these forsaken things, and he becomes the Wizard King, then he is the true key to ending classism and elitism in the kingdom, and making it a better, more equal place. Now, that is just a theory, and again, I'm not saying this is really that likely at all. In fact, I would say it's more unlikely than actual likely. If I were to bet money, I would bet that it isn't true. I just want to put a theory together. I've been having fun making Black Clover theory videos again, and this one just kind of struck me because it just doesn't make sense how Asta was able to survive 9 months in the womb with Licita, if Lucifero just got completely negged by a hug from her, including at a point during that hug, she was dying because Lucifero had struck her. So it really just is nuts. Like, how did he survive? How could his father possibly have lasted that long in sexual intercourse with her? This being his father would have to be incredibly powerful to do so. I mean, the only, I guess, other way you could do it is if she had been cursed like this after the fact. But don't really know. Anyways, guys, that's kind of it for the theory. I'm going to go over some reasons why this might not be a thing. And one of the things that this might not be a thing is that it would almost ruin Asta as a weak human who worked hard if he's a demigod / or half human, half Jotun. But it doesn't really have to do that, like I said. We know that he has just gotten way stronger, and we know that while maybe if he is a half Jotun, remember, there's a transformation there. He would have to transform into that hybrid form like Charmy did, probably. And therefore, most of what he's done now is all on his own work, his physical training. Sure, he has the anti-magic and the grimoire and the swords with Lib, but still, his physical stature would be mainly of his own will and his own volition. Maybe if he did transform to his hybrid state, that would change things, but then again, I don't really know. Also, technically, Licita said near her that thing affects, but maybe inside of her body doesn't affect him because it would be like a symbiotic relationship. But then again, he is inside of her. He is living off of her. And if you could say the closer you are to somebody, at least for her, the more her magic or her magical body, her magic stream properties affect, then it still should affect him within the body. The only way that you could, I guess, argue is that we don't necessarily know too much of how she got cursed, when she got cursed, or whatever with her body. I assume it's a curse because it's a similar curse to what happened to Henry, where he steals magic from people, although I would say Licita's is probably much more potent. Yeah, so we don't necessarily know when. It's possible that the father is just some average dude, and then Licita had the kid, and then after she had the kid, she got cursed with the body. So that is completely possible. That's why I kind of say that this theory, it's just a theory. I'm not saying it's likely or anything. In fact, I'm saying it's not. It's just a fun theory that I wanted to put together. But let me know your guys' thoughts down below. Leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed. Hope you guys all have an amazing day. Plus...